All right, so that was funny. We had two screens open, and so you get to hear the music overlay. That was really fun. Hey, I'm Brett Kinsella. This is Gain, the Generative AI News Rundown. We're here every week. Okay, wait a second. We got all sorts of things going on. We had YouTube open too. All right, so I'm Brett Kinsella. This is Gain, the Generative AI News Rundown, and we do this every week at 12 noon Eastern Time. We talk about all the amazing things going on in generative AI, and Eric Schwartz, head writer at VoiceBot.ai, is my guest every week. Eric, hello. How are you?
Doing well. Excited to get into all the latest.
All right, so we have a great show for you this week. We're going to talk about OpenAI function calling, really big deal this week. We also have news about generative search, Google, not on generative search, on some of their LLM stuff. We've got Bing Chat. We have Mistral, a huge seed funding round, Salesforce, and much more. But before we get started, I need to bring to stage a special guest. Michal Stanislawek, thanks for joining us.
Hello, Brett. Hello, Eric. Thanks for having me.
Good to have you here. Okay, so technical issues aside, let's get right into it. Michal is the founder of One and Hear Me AI, a longtime conversational AI expert, media expert, which will be pretty interesting, but a developer by training, which is particularly useful for our first conversation. So the first story today, OpenAI cuts prices and announces the most significant feature expansion of the year. And if we think about that feature expansion, we're talking about function calling. So I'll tell you what, Michal, why don't you tell us what function calling is?
Function calling is, well, I've got this theory that function calling is prompt engineering for developers. And that's what I wrote on LinkedIn. That's what we've discussed a little bit before. And effectively, what it means is that right now, as part of your API calls, developers can define a schema, and the model returns information exactly formatted as that schema, which effectively allows the models to invoke functions that are defined somewhere else, externally, somewhere in the code. Or it can allow the model to become a sort of a backend for an API. It can literally allow the model to become an API itself.
So the model, that's interesting because I hadn't really thought about that. But let me back up for 1 second. So
sure,
we have this construct of assistants knowing and doing. We have the virtual assistants like Alexa and Siri, which are very good at the doing tasks, because mostly what they're doing is they're connected to third-party services or applications. You ask it for something, and then there's some sort of function that's actually executed in the back end. Yep. They're not so good at the knowing function. You can ask them questions, and you get some information back, but it's not that great. So that's where ChatGPT has really shined, is the knowing function, and it's falling a little short on the doing function. And that's where plugins was supposed to help with this. But when they implemented function calls, it's another way to do that same thing.
Yes, it's very similar, but it also provides a different augmentation. It really allows us as developers or solution builders to create solutions that don't necessarily have to be a part of the ChatGPT as a platform. It can be completely outside. It can be completely separate. All it really needs is access to the model through the internet, and that's it. Everything else can be pretty much even local, if you think about it.
What do you mean when you said that it turns the model into an API? Because so the function calling can go the other direction. Then it can invoke the model as opposed to the model invoking a service.
Well, effectively, what can happen with the function calling is that you, as a developer, can define a schema to return a certain set of information. For example, you want to generate recipes. I think you guys went ahead and did that some time ago, right? then what you can do with the function calling is define a schema that would return recipes, and then effectively, because the model is returning data formatted based on that schema in a format, you could literally treat it as a backend. So you could allow users to say, I want to generate a recipe for a mac and cheese, right? And then you're able to respond as if you were an API. You could literally hide OpenAI behind your facade and be the best recipe API ever.
Interesting. Now, Eric, you've written about this. What was your key takeaway?
Yeah, I think for me the two elements are it really blends. It blurs the line between when is a generative AI pulling from a training database versus using its training to then find more information. The examples OpenAI used, for instance, were that a developer could have a tool that checks the weather elsewhere, but instead of having it directly linked to that database, it actually creates a question in computer code to send to an appropriate weather database, gets the answer in that code, and then translates it back into natural language. It's the idea of it's almost like a little bit like Google Duplex, where it's you want to make an appointment somewhere, and a complex algorithm figures out where you're talking about, how to call them, how to have a conversation, and then how to explain what happened in that conversation to you through an app of some kind. And in this case, you ask a question that it's not in, for instance, like a ChatGPT database, and function calling will understand that it doesn't have that information, and also how to get that information using natural language to computer code translation, as well as external sourcing. So it's a really, as Michal was saying, the local opportunities and the flexibility it offers could be a lot more useful than some of the plugins we've seen, especially the ones that have been a little buggy so far.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so there were a couple other announcements along with this. So function calling, I think, got everybody pretty excited. But we also have two other things that came up. One was a much larger context window for chat. So the turbo model's going from 4K tokens to 16K. And they talk about this idea of 16K being the equivalent of 20 pages of text. So if you think about 4K being 5 pages of text, what this is the context window. I think most of the people probably watching today know about that. But if you don't, that's how much data the model can keep in context. It can reference while it's trying to generate your answer. And so this is really useful for summarizations, like the obvious one. So right now you could put a 5-page document potentially in chat, and it'll actually be able to answer questions for you about that. But it wouldn't be able to answer your previous questions, because like that 5 pages would take up all the context window. If you've got a 20-page context window, obviously you can ask questions about something more significant. And then they have lower prices. And so they've been cutting prices for their embeddings model, 75%, for the chat model, about 25%. What did you make of these changes, Michal?
Well, I think that one thing that I've missed initially in this announcement is that the 16K token window comes at a different price point as well.
Yes.
It's twice as expensive as GPT 3.5 with the 4K context window, but I think this is significantly gonna help us deliver more complex solutions. One of the things that we are hitting at the moment is the need to manage the context very well when we're building assistants that are a little bit more complex than the usual question answering type of a solution. At that point, your context window is where you have to keep your additional data, your learning data from your knowledge base that isn't part of the set that the GPT was trained on, but also the memory, right? The length of the conversation, however long you want to keep it. And with the 16K context window, that allows us to be much more flexible in terms of how much context, especially, we can fit in, and it effectively will make those conversational assistants a little bit more smart, I would say, when we're building, those really custom ones. But on the other hand, it will allow other assistants to have a meaningful conversation with a much longer memory of what you were talking about with the chatbot or a voice bot.
Yeah, so for longer conversations, it's really important. Some people remember during the beta period for Bing Chat, at one point they limited your session to 5 questions. It's because the context window is actually too short the way they were managing it. Now, today, I think it's 20.
It's up to 30 now, actually.
Oh, is it up to 30? Okay,
Yeah,
so you can go 30 back and forth. And so what they're trying to do is optimize around that context window because it does lose context. And sometimes like Bing Chat will just like time out and be like, oh, you need to refresh. I always wonder if that's a technical issue or that's just it lost context. So it's just trying to make you refresh.
Could be one of those network errors that you get when you're working with the OpenAI APIs. It is a journey. Let's put it this way.
It is. Well, so the other thing around the lower pricing, and you mentioned this idea of the larger context window being twice the amount, which I think is really interesting because you're paying that higher price even if you don't use the full context window. So the data token cost is the higher price, even if you're only using 1 page or 20 characters or whatever it is. You're paying basically double the cost for input and output. Is output double as well? It might be 75% higher, but it's close. Yeah.
Yeah. I think right now we're getting to that moment in time where, when we're thinking about, again, more complex workflows for LLMs, we will not be using a single model, even within a single session. We will have to be adaptive in terms of which model we're using for a given call based on what the requirement is. Because if you're just using the 4K context window, but you're using the 16K model, then you will effectively be paying twice, which doesn't make any sense.
Well, there might be sometimes when you can use the ADA model. For example, if you're doing retrieval and you have an embeddings model, so then you need an orchestrator in between to sort of figure out, like, do I send it to the ADA model? Do I send it to Turbo 3.5, 4K, which is a DaVinci model, or do I need the larger context window? And so some sort of logic in there where you have a switcher that says, okay, for this type of thing, I need this. And with the larger context window, it might actually be even easier because at some point you could actually just look at the number of characters and you could see that you're at risk of losing your context window. And then for the subsequent part of that session, you just go up to the 16K.
Yeah. Correct. And this is even more important for multi-language workflows. So, for example, in Polish, whatever is the 20-page window would probably equal to 10-page window because of the tokens being completely differently counted for the Polish special signs or any special signs in other languages. So it's right now we're sort of estimating when we're working on this, we're saying that 16K context window in English is really an 8K context window in Polish.
Is it really that much? So take double?
It's almost double. Yeah.
I think it's also worth noting that there's an element of experimentation here because it's not only the question of when do you need a 16K context window, but it's also a question of how important and when are certain parameters important. So parameters being an example of when do you switch to a different size model, or does it matter about the training size, or does it matter about the token size? How much are each of these important depending on what you're using them for, and having that sort of dynamic change between them, different models, different context windows is going to be at some point a big demand, I think, because unless it's a certain kinds of businesses that always have a steady, consistent amount of a steady, consistent need for a certain size context window, having the option to switch between them and with that pricing change is going to be something that companies want because they don't want to have to keep paying for the bigger window if they don't always need it. But on the other hand, they want to have it available for when they do.
Yeah, absolutely. So looks like, all right. So just one last point I just want to make about this is the pricing reduction. Again, if you look at the OpenAI models, they were a little bit more expensive, I think, than the last round of Anthropic pricing. You're sort of looking at these things, but the pricing is very dynamic here. It's a very important part of the competition at the moment. If you are a lot more expensive than Anthropic and it has a much larger context window, then it just gives people an incentive to try it. If you're competitive and I don't really need 100,000 token context window, 16 is good enough. Okay, well then I'll just keep using what I'm already using because I've started out trying that. And so and if you look at OpenAI as well, they have a lot more experience, a lot more data, and what they've been doing as they've been learning and using these models at scale, they've been driving costs down and passing at least a portion of that along to the customer.
Yeah.
And there's also this rarely discussed notion of latency, right? Those calls can take quite a long time.
Yes.
So the fewer tokens you actually use in a call, the better, the lower the latency, the more responsive your agent is, right? So this is also an important consideration. And to sum up this discussion around the context windows right now, what we're observing, working like on real world use cases at the moment, is that the biggest challenge really is the context management, as the proper context management within the given limitations of the context windows of different models having now slightly different capabilities as well. And I think this is going to be a topic that is going to get discussed a little bit more in the coming months.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's move on. I think we covered that in depth. I hope people heard some things that maybe they did not know previously. By the way, this is Gain. We are here every week at noon on Thursdays, noon Eastern time on Thursdays. And let us know if you're in the audience because we'll work your comments in. We would love to give you a shout out. If you have questions, you can ask those as well. We've got Michal here who's doing a lot of frontline work on this. So maybe you will benefit from that. Okay, folks, let's go on to the next story, and that is Google rolls out access to LLMs, text to image, generative code, a whole lot more. So Google Vertex has been out for a little bit. You can use it for some of, I think it was really mostly the vector models. But now they're actually starting to roll out Palm. They're starting to roll out access to Imagine. They're starting to roll out access to Cody. So those are the large language model, the text to image model, and the code generation model. So all of this has been undercover. It's like the super secret Google capability that they didn't let anybody else try. But now it's going to be out in the open. And, it looks like it's going to be easy to use. Pricing is going to be effective. I suspect they're not too late. What do you think, Michal?
I don't think they're too late, but right now we're at this point in time where people are slightly exhausted, and I see this all around me. By trying new things, and I fear that it might lead to their features not being explored in depth for quite a bit of time. But I think that right now it's still like we are still super early, right? So there's very little point in trying to even place a finger on who might become the leader, right? Obviously, there are some predictions that you can make around this, but anything might change. And I'm looking at this with a lot of hope because as you know, I've been quite sour with Google for making announcements and not really delivering on them. So right now it's there. So yeah.
What do you think, Eric?
No, I know what Michal's talking about, and there's a certain amount of justifiable skepticism. Although I will say one thing that separates this from some of the other announcements that they've maybe not fully committed to is a lot of this is about organizing what they already have. I mean, as you wrote about Nvidia, it's not that Google didn't have a lot of resources devoted to AI and research on all these kinds of products. They just hadn't reached a point of here's the product for enterprise and consumers when OpenAI burst on the scene. But if you look at what's in their their AI model garden, it's all these very useful tools that if you can combine them and make them easy to switch between and make them and link them to the pre-existing Google Cloud account that obviously many businesses already have, then it's as you were saying, it's not even about adopting something so much as it is exploring a new area in your existing system, your existing garden. So I think that Google has a lot of opportunity here that some of its rivals don't, but it's still going to be a question of it's almost going to be more about educating its customers about all the new things they can do.
Right. And also changing some habits, getting them to try something new, because most of them will have tried something, or a lot of them will have tried something. There's 4,500 people using Azure OpenAI services. There's 4,500 companies. There's many more going direct to the OpenAI API. So again, you've got to get someone to try this. And I think a lot of this actually is trying to make sure that people are trying Google as opposed to, oh, what's my alternative going to be? What do I want to test? Oh, maybe I'll do Cohere. Maybe I'll do a model off of Hugging Face. Maybe I'll try Amazon Bedrock so I get access to 3 or 4 different models. So a lot of it is just like they can't wait any longer to give people access because the alternative testing is going on right now and they need to be in the game. The other thing is, if you just look at this text generation, PaLM, that's GPT-3/GPT-4, chat application, that's ChatGPT, PaLM for chat, image generation, that's DALL-E, right? Code completion, that's that's Copilot. It's Codex really, but then turned into like GitHub Copilot through Microsoft. Speech to text, they have Chirp, Whisper. So it's this one-to-one competition that's going on, and I think it's actually very savvy of them. They also are actually doing some consulting work. They've through their cloud organization, they're offering like consulting journey services to help people get set up. Really smart, because I've been talking to a lot of people at the enterprise side through a bunch of enterprise interviews that I've been running, and they don't know what to do next. They don't there's no blueprint. And so anyone who can help them say, oh, here's a logical way to proceed, you're likely to be successful, I think they're going to be, it's going to work. And then finally, they launched with announcing some customers. This isn't 4,500 customers, but it's actually in use. And it just sort of goes back to that whole idea that we've been talking about here for a few weeks now. The foundation model wars are actually cloud wars in disguise.
Yeah, and it's dangerous to extend any of the metaphors businesses use too far, but it is interesting to me that Google is talking about this garden of products, that you pick and choose and make your own thing, whereas Microsoft and OpenAI are very keen on the analogy of a co-pilot, of someone who you ask what it can do or how it can help you, and it will tell you, rather than necessarily looking through a static field of options.
Yeah, but don't you think that's because like Microsoft's really talking more at the application layer and Google's talking at the model layer?
Yes, but it's also, at least because, as Michal said, it's so early right now, there's the first question every business asks is, what can I do with this technology that seems so exciting? And if you can have a ready answer, not just from a human, but from the actual technology itself, I can imagine that appealing to some, certainly small businesses.
Yeah, I think what Microsoft is doing by introducing copilots and the whole idea of copilots versus assistants, right? It's a concept that tells you there's this being, that agent that you can hand off some things to, you can hand off your control to at some point. But at any point when you're cooperating with that copilot, you can take it back and you can be in the driver's seat again. And I think that analogy is quite a smart one. And also the idea to educate, especially enterprises and bigger corporations, is to make sure that people start understanding what generative AI and AI in general are bringing to the table and what sort of capabilities they bring. Because one of the things that we're learning as we're talking to customers or potential customers or doing workshops is that we live in this bubble and we know everything, and it's easy to assume that everyone around like knows what generative AI is and what capabilities it has. And most people don't, even if they heard about ChatGPT, even if they heard about Midjourney or read about DALL-E somewhere. They can't necessarily right now connect the dots. How can this translate to our workflow? How can this help within the processes within our corporation, right? And I think that bringing the discussion to that level is a smart move. There's always time to discuss technicalities. There's always time to educate developers, and as we're seeing, developers are really coming to the forefront of all of this, and leading the way as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have a comment here from Benjamin Colts about the latency topic that was mentioned around the ChatGPT or the GPT API responses. He's currently looking at that. And I think that's latency is a big issue that I think really just hasn't risen to the level of prominence yet, mostly because people aren't in production. They're just doing POCs and they're like, wow, isn't that neat?
But the problem is that now we're getting to like the testing stages where we're not even imitating production, right? We're starting to put in more people that are using the assistant at the moment, and we find ourselves in situations where we have to wait for like 30 seconds for a response from the OpenAI API, right?
Yes.
And it's like,
don't use GPT-4.
Yes, it's not even GPT-4. It's 3.5, right? Because I think what's happening is we're getting closer to those thresholds, right? Which is scary, because when I think about it, and when I think about the production load that is going to be put on this, especially when it's new, especially when users want to try it all at once, it is scary, because there's no good way to tell a user to wait for 30 seconds.
Absolutely. Okay.
Just no good explanation.
We're going to talk about that in just a minute, because that's like one of our other topics. Latency is really big. So Benjamin, you are on it, and Michal, I didn't even tee you up on this, so this is great that you brought that up perfectly. So hey folks, this is the Gain Show, the Generative AI News Rundown. We do this every week at 12 noon Eastern. Sometimes we have special guests like Michal Stanislawek, who are giving us additional insight. Usually it's Eric and I here. And if you're out there, just put something in the chat. Let us know you're here. Ask questions, make comments. We'd love to incorporate it into the show. Also, we have an event coming up. It's a free generative AI innovation conference. It's called Synthedia 3. It is at 12 noon Eastern on the 27th. And maybe, I think Andrew's in here. Andrew, if you can just put the bit.ly Synthedia 3 link in, that would be great, so that people can join us. It's free, but you must register. We have some really great speakers coming up. It's going to be relevant to some of the things we're going to talk about in a minute. So definitely everybody do that. Looks like the bit.ly link is in there, bit.ly/Synthedia 3. Okay, great. So let's keep going with the news today. And we're going to stay with Google for one more segment here. And they announced something that, a few of the tech press picked up on it, but I haven't seen a lot of people talking about it, but kind of interesting. The virtual try-on, and we talk about this in terms of fusing fashion with generative AI. But essentially what they did is they created some generative AI models based on human models, and they used a generative AI model so that they could actually show you clothing on different models. So the idea here is a user not to upload your own photo or anything like that. They've got, I can't even remember what it is. It's like, it must be something like 50 to 60 different types of model body types. And then you select the one that you want, and then you can basically put any clothing on it. And what they said is these things have existed in the past, but it really didn't show it didn't take like a 2D image and then layer it on so that you could see it in 3D, so you could actually do the rotations and those types of things. It didn't show exactly how it would fall. And they're saying, hey, this is one of the key reasons why people don't buy clothes online. Now, people do buy clothes online, but when they don't, very often they feel like they need to try it on. So it is interesting, and it's they're using the Imagine model and some other things to make this successful. But I don't know, Eric, when you saw this story, what did you think about it?
I thought it's not at all surprising. I mean, as we were talking about before, the thing about Google is that they have probably so many things in their back pocket that they have yet to tell anyone about. And this feels very much like one of them in terms of applying a technology that they've been developing to data that they have. I mean, this has been trained on the Google Shopping Graph. So this is very much an outgrowth of the Alphabet as a whole, which is one of those things that you and I have talked about before, where we're sometimes surprised about how little integration there is between the more commercial size of these tech giants and their technical development. And this feels like a very obvious combination and one that has a lot of potential. I mean, it's a question of how well people trust it and how much people find it changes their opinion about wanting to buy something. But if it just even through word of mouth demonstrates that it does do what it says, that it will accurately represent what your body type looks like with those clothes, then that's great. I mean, especially not just size, but also skin tone and all the other bits that make buying clothes sometimes a hassle if you're only looking at a catalog.
I think it's smart on two levels. One, I already mentioned, which is like giving ordinary people a feel of what's possible with generative AI, right? That's super important, and that gives a proper, really useful a way for people to play with. But the other aspect is, which might also be super important for the e-commerce businesses, is that when you give tools like this to people, there's potentially far less returns that you will have to deal with. So even if you forget the actual sales side, right? Rather than ordering 3 or 4 different sizes of the same thing and then returning 3 of them, they might actually find the right one, or they might find the right color that matches their skin tone or body type, or whatever other aspect they might be looking for. So I think this is something that is a really interesting use case for e-commerce, which we haven't seen a lot of, to be honest.
Not to mention the fact that there's always all these questions about, will generative AI chatbots make search engines less useful and dry up one of Google's very important sources of revenue, which is data on what people are looking for. Suddenly, this opens a new door of there's a lot of people looking for this kind of clothing, and there's a lot of interest among a very specific subset of people for a certain type of clothing or other product. And suddenly manufacturers have a lot of interest, again, in what Google can give them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll close up on this with 2 things. One is, Eric, you mentioned the Google Shopping Graph, 35 billion images in the Google Shopping Graph. So if they need to train a model for products, for apparel, those types of things, they have a significant advantage. They don't have to crawl the web and worry about who owns things. They already have access to this data. They've already curated it. They've already gotten rid of the detritus. So a significant advantage. And I'm with you, Michal, on the point about returns. My assessment is this probably won't change shopping behavior that much, at least in the near term. Maybe over time it will, but I wouldn't expect anything significant in the next 24 months, frankly, out of this. People saying I'm selling more. Maybe, I mean, there's a few retailers that are doing it, but I'm not sure that is the biggest barrier. But for the people who are comfortable buying online, reducing the returns could be a gold mine. And I think you hit the nail on the head that might be the most interesting thing. Okay. All right, so let's move on to the next topic. So I want to talk just a little bit about generative search. And I've got a couple of stories here. So there's one out of Roast, which is a performance marketing agency. So performance marketing, if you don't know what that is, like SEO, click-throughs, all these types of things online. And one of the things they looked at was Bard and ChatGPT. Now, they didn't do Google SGE for some reason. Maybe they don't have access to it yet. So this was kind of an interesting thing that they had access to those 2 things. And they said, okay, let's do some search and let's see how often brands come up in the search results. Now, the first chart we have here that we're showing shows that the average number of words in a response from Bard was 218 versus ChatGPT, which was 31, which is very interesting. So now the question set, there were 500 questions related to travel in the United Kingdom. Okay. So like people have some context there. And so Bard was giving a very long response and ChatGPT was giving a very short response, basically 1/8 to 1/9 the length. So that I think that was very interesting, just on the face of it. But the other thing that they brought up, and I'll scroll down here for those of you who are listening to this afterwards, just go to VoiceBot, or excuse me, go to youtube.com/the @voicebot AI. You'll be able to see these images. But what they talked about was brand mentions. And they also said, and maybe this is because there's a lot more words per response, but Google Bard brand mentions of all the tests they did, I think it was 4 times more likely to have a brand listed. And they had, for example, the top one was British Airways, had 85 mentions in these among the 500 travel questions that were asked. ChatGPT only mentioned British Airways 4 times, and that was also the top. But 4 was the most that it ever answered, whereas Google Bard had, 40 for American Airlines, in the 30s for Delta, United, and EasyJet. So, really interesting when we start thinking about SEO and how generative search or conversational search, as we think about it, might change search engine optimization, and what role or what activities brands need to take now to make sure they're either showing up or they're showing up in a meaningful way in comparison to their competitors. And Eric, let's ask you about this one first.
Yeah, I mean, those graphs really tell you something about what people look for online. I mean, there is a real sense of that the data used to train these models involves a lot of people asking questions about going on trips based on the hotels and airlines, which I find interesting. But I think it's, when we talk about the diversity of these models, both on the foundational level and also within as applications, like, sometimes people want a very broad answer anything tool, but sometimes what people would prefer is a very specific, when I ask it a question, it's going to know that I'm wanting a response based around these topics or these brands. And so if Bard can say that, okay, well, if you're using Bard to find out information about places far away, then we're going to be able to source British Airways immediately and get you the relevant information that you want. Then people are going to turn to Bard for those questions more than they turn to ChatGPT. Whereas if they want something, just a very quick response on something, then maybe ChatGPT will be where they go to first. So I guess it's just a matter of if people are going to be willing to switch back and forth, or if the models themselves are going to have to adapt for the use cases that obviously change all the time for what people want from them.
It might be also what Google optimizes for, right? So Google is always putting these keyword terms in, which brands tend to be some of them. What do you think, Michal?
Yeah, I think that might be it. It's Google are definitely more aware of the brand context of what they're doing. I mean, they've been doing search for forever. When you think about it,
so don't you think that this might be a difference in the training data set as well? Whereas OpenAI is just scraping the internet. And so ChatGPT, when you ask questions about travel in the UK, it's going to be looking at all of the content. Whereas Google, I'm guessing, has some emphasis on their training data set for Bard, which is different than what OpenAI had.
I think it might not necessarily be just the training data. There might be, some differences in terms of the emphasis on brand or branded context content in terms of the Google training data. But I think, and this is only my suspicion, is that there might be a difference in the instructioning that Google are doing for those models, so that they respond in a certain way and they respond with much more branded content. The problem with this is that, when you're a brand, you're not necessarily in full control of how your brand is relayed to the users, right? In this particular context. And there is no clear way to understand how can you gain that control, or even elements of control? So, while this is great on some level, it might not be that great if you start thinking about it on a level of how do I, perform this SEO on the generative AI search.
So it's good to know that you have a problem, but if there's no thing you can do about it, how helpful is it? I think that's fair, and I think that Roast is working on these types of things, particularly for Google SGE. A really good point, though, I think, around this idea of that there might be some sort of model instruction that's going on that's going to emphasize this. Maybe it's a combination of the two. I hadn't really thought about that. It might have to do with also the way they build their vector databases. And that, like, what the proximity is, like there might be like a tighter proximity for brands with certain types of travel questions than there is when you just take general internet data, when it's not as clear that that's there.
Yeah, if you type in "I want to travel in Britain," then probably British Airways will definitely come up very quickly, as opposed to, even if you say travel in America, American Airlines may not be the first thing.
Yeah, so I hadn't really thought about this, but I think that the ChatGPT is not getting that. And so I'm wondering if Google is training also on search data. So they've got internet data, but they also have a lot of search data, and they have search data coupled with results and links. And so there might be something going on with PageRank in here as well, and that they're starting to think, and that's where you might get closer proximity in the vector database to brands, to certain type of questions, versus a general sweep of data on the internet might not give that, because you're going to have a lot of things that Google wouldn't actually ever pay attention to. And so it might be a smaller portion of their training data set.
Yeah, and the study doesn't mention exactly. I mean, I assume this was, not to jump ahead, this is pre the most recent BARD updates. But I mean, one thing that Google always emphasizes is local information or local data. Like, they don't want to. That was one of the things that appealed about them really early on, and probably still does. So if you're searching in Britain, you're going to get British stuff.
Okay. Michal, do you have a final point on that?
No, I think the only other thing that I wanted to mention is that Google really understands the searching habits of people and the patterns. And I think this is something that no one else really has. And whether they're using it or not, they definitely have access to that based on the current Google search.
This makes me think they are. Just like, if thinking about this data, I hadn't initially done it until we had this conversation. That's why these conversations are so good. Like, we look at it, we interpret it, we publish, and then we talk about it afterwards. And I have a feeling that there's something about them anticipating questions, wanting certain types of answers or certain types of success, and really just goes back to this idea that they may be more successful. Staying in this same realm, I wanted to touch on something that's not news yet. We're about to publish this. This will come out later today, I think. But we did just a quick analysis of latency, and we didn't look at. Well, we did actually look at ChatGPT and BARD, but really we wanted to focus on search, because that's, Rose was talking about search. So, like, we think about search. What are the search engines? The conversational agents, they already talked about. Bing Chat, Perplexity AI, and Google SGE are the leading generative AI search engines right now. And one of the things that's been bothering me, it didn't bother me in March because I didn't have any alternative, or I had Perplexity, but I was just so amazed at what was going on with Bing. I was willing to wait. But it's really been bothering me lately, particularly with Google SGE coming out, and that Bing takes too long to respond. And we talked about latency earlier, particularly with the OpenAI models. But if you look at this, we've got the average response for some questions. We did a variety of different types of questions. The average response was over 25 seconds. In fact, we have this other thing, like first word was like 19 to 21 seconds usually as well. So it's like, you don't even know what's going on initially. They've like a little thing on the screen, but like, you don't know what's coming. The median was about 27 seconds for Bing. But okay, so we'll just do the averages. The average for Perplexity was 7.4 seconds, and the average for Google Search Generative Experience was 4.4 seconds. And then when we get to the medians, it's like just as much. Actually, it's a little bit more because 6.5 for Perplexity and 4 for Google. And I have this sense that I can't stand waiting that long for Google. I mean, not for Google, for Bing Chat. So I'm using Google and I'm using Perplexity. So I was using Perplexity and Bing Chat. I'm using more Perplexity. And now I'm starting to use Google Search Generative a little bit too.
Like this is another example of what Google did when they initially launched search, right?
Exactly.
When you typed something, you had instant results, right? As compared to Yahoo and all the others Alta Vistas back in the day, right? They were taking a long time to deliver you results, and Google was instant. And this is exactly the same thing that's happening here.
Well, a lot of people talk about that. They think about the Google search page, how Spartan it is. And when we think about Google, we think better search results. But early on, part of the reason it was so Spartan was to differentiate from the Alta Vistas and the Yahoos and the Excites, which were portals. They had just like images everywhere. They took a long time to load, and they were thinking, if I have a question to the time I get a response, what are all the things that can get in the way? Well, obviously they enter something and then I have to get to the response. But before that, like how long does it take for the page to load? And that Spartan page just loaded faster. And they've continually been the fastest response time. Now, at some point, everything's fast enough. And I would say like Perplexity right now is fast enough. And what you'll also see with Perplexity is they have about 50% more words per response than Google Search Generative Experience. So it's like it's a different result that you're getting, maybe more contextual. Those seem fast enough. Bing Chat, too slow. I think it's going to kill them.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see.
Well, that's the thing about conversation versus search, right? I mean, we have gotten used to Google being lightning fast, but when we're having a conversation, even if it's with an AI, it doesn't necessarily have to finish immediately, but we need that illusion of someone talking, even if they don't know how they're going to finish the sentence they're starting. It makes it a lot more bearable than the idea of staring. It's the difference between seeing someone typing versus staring at the bubbles of a text message before it arrives. It's the one makes it feel a lot longer than the other.
Okay, so just give you a couple more insights here that weren't in that chart that I just shared. One is that if you use ChatGPT 3.5 for the subset of questions which aren't relevant to like current events, so that ChatGPT can answer them, it's pretty close to what you would see from Perplexity, just a little bit longer usually. So usually good, and on a per word basis is very effective. GPT-4 is generally as long or longer than Bing Chat, so Bing must be doing something. GPT-4 with the Bing Chat search model is incredibly long. There were some times when you waited over a minute for your first word. One of them, it took over 3 minutes to generate the response. Now, these were much more extensive responses. Now, what you will find with GPT-4 with the Bing search chat, or with Bing search in GPT-4 and ChatGPT, it's like all these layers that they have that you put it through, is it actually can be very quick. It can be sub 20 seconds, but it's usually only 15 or 20 words, one citation, that type of thing. It still takes a long time for it to go to Bing, ask Bing to search, read the search page results, which you can see all in real time happening, and then to give you an answer. And it seems too long to me. It's particularly when you've got something like Perplexity is going to be, it has its other challenges, like does it have awareness and those types of things. But Google Search Generative Experience is pretty good, and it's super fast, and that's what most people are going to see first. I don't know that there's going to be this incentive to try Bing Chat.
No one will wait. No one will wait for 30 seconds for the results, especially if they can get instant results from, or close to instant results from other generative AI search experiences. And this is also where this latency again can play a deciding role in terms of who will take the leader position, because even if they're not at the moment, if Google can provide low latency on their APIs for their models,
Other
then
people will use it.
naturally, exactly, yes.
It's all about latency today.
Mm-hmm. And this problem will just become bigger and bigger because, again, as soon as we, with our solutions, are going to start going properly into production, and we're going to have these issues with OpenAI taking 30 seconds to respond or taking 10 seconds to respond, there's only so much UX trickery that we can do in terms of, entertaining the user while they wait. And then we're going to start searching for solutions that will provide way lower latency than that.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Now, Eric, you had another story this week about Bing Chat because they've been moving along pretty quickly in terms of their functionality. So aside from latency, they're killing it on a lot of fronts. And so tell me about their new features.
Yeah, I mean, these are very much the consumer-oriented things that people want. It's things that are either familiar from search or from conversational AI in general, and in this case, specifically the multimodal experience, where one element is the idea of using images. So Microsoft obviously has the capacity to put images into the Bing AI chat, and now it's doing so across all of its platforms. So it'll, if you ask a question about traveling somewhere, for instance, you'll get not just the text, but also examples of images and a more sort of whole meal experience of what of the information you're looking for. And then, of course, the other one that, of course, close to our hearts is the idea of a voice interface, which is now something accessible on Windows 11. It was something that Bing already had on the mobile app, and now once again on your computer, you can talk to a Microsoft AI for questions and hear a response. And nobody's saying the name Cortana, but
Cortana lives.
Yeah, it's it does feel very much like bringing it back without saying it somehow will make people not question it. And it's of course not exactly the same, and there are several things that make it different from a voice assistant, smart home control, things like that. But the idea of you're on your computer and you ask it a question and you get a response and links and so on. I mean, that is very much what I remember Cortana being like not that long ago.
Absolutely.
So many coincidences recently with the Cortana and the Windows Assistant, but also with the Google Assistant sunsetting finally the third-party skills, which is an end of a certain era, and at the same time releasing the models and everything else, which was coincidence, maybe,
and adding new voices even.
Adding new voices. Hey, folks, we're going to do something that we started doing a couple of weeks ago at the finish here, and that's winners and losers of the week. If you want to enter that into the chat. So generative AI winners and losers of the week. We're going to just wait a moment. And Michal, we'll ask those from you in just a moment as well. So I think there's another story that we wanted to talk about, Eric, and that was Salesforce. They have a new AI cloud, and they are putting more money behind investing in the space. What happened?
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about your resurrections. Hello, Einstein, once again. Not as a voice assistant per se, but using the idea of Einstein, both the mascot and as a technical tool, as a moderator for all of these new generative AI enterprise tools. That is the AI cloud. So it's all these. Salesforce has been very much on board with generative AI and the idea of bringing it to enterprise, to businesses. And now what they have is a lot of applications with multiple model options. So that's AWS and Anthropic, Cohere, OpenAI. It's they're really trying to see. They're trying an all at once approach, everything all at once approach to see what what businesses want. And they're using Einstein, specifically the Einstein trust layer, as a way to make businesses more comfortable with it in terms of compliance and privacy and company secrets. And they're also looking for new companies. They announced back in March a $250 million investment fund for startups, and they've now doubled it to $500 million. So I think there's a sense that Salesforce doesn't want to get caught flat-footed on what might be a major revolution in business technology, the way that it may have felt about some of the other changes that have happened in the last several years, because Salesforce is so dominant in so many ways that they can afford. I mean, they can, as a side experiment, put hundreds of millions of dollars into generative AI, and if it pays off, then they look great. And if it doesn't pay off, it's still not going to exactly take the company down.
Absolutely. Michal, any thoughts on this?
No, I think we're going to see more and more of this. Corporations trying to get into these areas. I mean, I can see a couple of others entering this space. This is similar to what Bloomberg has done with the large language model, trying to do a foundational model for financial data. We're gonna see many more, like a lot more vertical solutions, and there will be certain companies trying to grab the horizontal landscape, but I think that going forward, the ones that will really thrive are going to be the ones that are going to be focusing on specific niches as well, and delivering very good quality service around those.
100%. I love that comment. It's the thing that I've been talking about in terms of the large language models. If you're not one of the 2 or 3 top already in the space, you need to have probably a vertical focus. It could be a horizontal focus, but you need to have some sort of niche focus. And for the most part, I think these initiatives where they're trying to play a role kind of like a mini cloud are not going to work. But I think Salesforce might work sort of. So they have a big ecosystem of third-party apps. And so particularly around sales and CRM and some of those things, if people want to build new applications on top of that with large language models in particular, but also text image models, other types of foundation models, I think it might be an easy place for them to do. I think it'll probably be as successful as Salesforce's, I think it's force.com has been, which has been somewhat successful. Not a huge thing, but I think that can survive, and it's actually not a bad idea for them to do that. Whereas everything else is just going to go to the main clouds, and most people don't have the scale Salesforce has, so they're just not going to be successful on that front. But it is interesting. The other thing too is when you become really important in tech, it's hard to not be part of the latest tech trend and like be central to it, even though people who build foundation models and the cloud hosting providers, and then of course Nvidia, are like the most important companies, but you sort of feel left out. And so we're big too. Maybe we need to have a play in this space. As long as they keep their ambitions focused, I think they'll do fine.
Yep. But it's also a very easy time, or it's very easy to get pushed off your bike in tech these days, right? So a lot of those endeavors will not necessarily last for a long time.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's go into winners and losers. We had a couple other stories, but I think it's we're coming up at the top of the hour. So we'll start with you, Eric. Let's start with losers of the week. Who was your top loser this week?
I think that would be every chip maker that's not Nvidia. We've talked before about Nvidia being just well ahead when it comes to building the actual chips behind generative AI, but there's been new reports about how they're just so ridiculously far ahead that the next company to potentially be a player, AMD, will be putting its chips on the market 18 months after Nvidia. So and that's before anyone else. So at this point, when you're looking at certainly on stock market, but just in general, chip makers, it looks like it's Nvidia and then the rest of the world, honestly, at this point.
So I got it. So everybody who's not Nvidia is the loser this week. Michal, who's your loser this week?
Well, in light of your research, the definite loser of the week is Bing. And this is primarily because they were almost the first ones, right? And
Yes.
now they seem to be giving away the advantage that they've built, which, yeah, doesn't feel good.
That's really good. And I'm going to build on a comment that you made for my loser of the week, and that's Google.
Mm-hmm.
Because of Google Assistant, they've essentially given up all of that distribution, all that ecosystem. A lot of the developers for Google Assistant would be all over Palm right now and doing some amazing things, but they walked away from it. Like, I think that if they'd held on for another 4 months, 5 months,
yeah,
they would have left it. They would have said, well, wait a second, we don't want to get rid of that just yet. And I think they killed a lot of momentum that they had.
Oh my God. I mean, do we have another hour?
Well, let's do a separate podcast on that.
Yeah, let's do it. But just 2 sentences on this, right? Google had, and like they would be able to build an enormous advantage with the features and functionalities that they had versus the other assistants, with the ability for developers to actually have those catch-all capabilities in terms of the user input, for example, which would be fantastic with LLMs at this point, and all the built-in intents and good stuff that they had in terms of the organic traffic. I mean, up until the very last days of the actions that we had traffic on them and we had users on them coming from organic traffic, and it's like, why?
Well, they have, and that was already in the Android ecosystem. It was they already had devices in homes, and they've sort of given up all of that, at least position in it. Now, granted, I think they're going to just bring Google Assistant back, and it's just going to be powered by something else. A little room. People who watch this get like little benefits sometimes towards the end. Alexa's going to get large language model later this year. So look for that. It's being worked on. I have some sense of timeline on that, but I think it's really interesting what's happening in this space. Okay. So we've got our losers, but we should maybe come back to that topic. I'll do the first winner this week, and I'm going to share a little picture. And this shows market share for content management systems. And look right there, 44% WordPress. Depending on like what you look at, some people think it's 65% for WordPress, but let's just say the next closest one is somewhere between a quarter and 10%. Depending on which market research you're looking at. And this week, they came out with an AI assistant through their Jetpack plugin. And I think that that's going to be a very useful assistant because there's a couple of things for it. So first of all, it's kind of like Jasper AI. It'll write blog posts for you, do lists, do headlines and things like that. But it'll also like insert tables. And so and WordPress is great. Like you don't have to know CSS in order to make something look good very often if you have the right template. But sometimes like it's not built into your template. And they're going to have some features where you can say, put this in a table. And it'll automatically create a table out of it. And I think that's going to be really helpful to a lot of the people. Now, there's a lot of enterprises who use WordPress, and there's a lot of small independents or smaller businesses who use it. I think it's going to be really helpful, particularly to the smaller guy out there, that they're going to have a co-pilot for publishing.
Yeah, I mean, WordPress is probably the biggest or one of the biggest sources of unstructured data and, weird and different formatting. So, there's a huge potential for unification and utilizing the capabilities of large language models to actually bring some structure into what was or what is right now, a blob of unstructured data. And I think, that's where, a lot of the potential lies with these solutions, especially if you think about co-pilots or assistants that can be built on top of this, or knowledge bases.
Perfect. All right, Eric, you give us your winner of the week.
Well, I haven't even written about this yet because it's brand new, but I'm going to go ahead and say, at least in generative AI, it's Mercedes-Benz drivers who are about to get ChatGPT integrated into their voice assistant. So suddenly, this is I just saw this right before the show started, actually. But yeah, Mercedes has always been very trying to be ahead of the curve when it comes to their voice assistant, and now they're actually making their the MBUX, as they call it, the Hey Mercedes voice assistant, have the same capabilities in terms of conversation as ChatGPT, combined with their existing, obviously, features. So this is one of those things where Mercedes is obviously jumping ahead, but there's no doubt that if this becomes something that people look for in their cars, then suddenly there's going to be a whole new realm of voice assistant competition.
That's going to be bad news for SoundHound and Alexa Auto. I can just tell you right now. Michal, you're a winner of the week in generative AI.
Well, it's going to be quite obvious. OpenAI for functions, my definite winner for this week, maybe even for the next week. But coming back to Eric's point on the Mercedes, my only thought is that it has started, especially in light of Alexa getting LLM. We're finally getting there. We're finally getting to a point where the stream of smart speakers being really smart, and those devices that you can really have a meaningful or at least engaging and somewhat knowledgeable conversation with, is finally getting to fruition, and I'm super excited about that. And I've been telling everyone who has been in the conversational AI space for the last couple of years and stayed here despite the winters and the tough times, that it has been worth it for this moment, or these moments that will come shortly.
That's amazing. We're going to finish up right there. Okay, everybody. I'm Brett Kinsella. That's Eric Schwartz. That's Michal Stanislawek. Don't forget to register for Synthedia 3, the Generative AI Innovation Conference. It's online. It's free. It's in 2 weeks. bit.ly/Synthedia, the number 3. I hope you can join us there. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining us today. Make some comments. If you don't mind, just going in and liking the video, liking the LinkedIn post, wherever you guys are today. We definitely really appreciate that. Bye-bye.